House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou i te whare. My question is to the Minister for Building and Housing and asks, has he received advice on how many children's lives would be saved and how many child hospital admissions would be prevented by a rental housing warrant of fitness? If yes, what are those figures?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
My advice is that the government's proposal to require rental properties to be insulated would save 18 deaths per year, and the mandatory requirement for smoke alarms 3 deaths per year. The analysis also shows savings of $12 million per year in hospital admissions. The estimates are not exclusively for children. It is not possible to give a single answer to the proposition of a warrant of fitness because it depends on what the specific requirements of that warrant of fitness would be. My advice is the greatest benefits are from insulation and smoke alarms, and that is why those requirements are to become law. We do not support requirements like in her warrant of fitness bill that would prohibit renting a house unless it had glass visibility strips on all windows, because we think it is over the top.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So can the Minister confirm he does not have any advice on the cost of children's deaths and hospitalisations versus the cost of a rental warrant of fitness for housing?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr
The analysis the government has done in my ministry includes not just the deaths of children, but the deaths of all New Zealanders. For instance, I'm advised the greatest benefits, in fact, in terms of saving lives, from our requirement that all rental properties be insulated is actually from older New Zealanders and influenza-type diseases, and I think it is proper that we count the lives of all those that are saved, as well as children.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree that even one child dying from a cold, damp, mouldy house is one child too many?
Yes.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Yes, and that is why this government's going to require that those 180,000 rental properties that are not currently insulated but can be, shall be, by the 1st of July 2019. That is why the existing housing regulations require that homes be free from dampness and mould, and that our bill before Parliament will require my ministry to actually be able to enforce those regulations better. What we do not want is a bureaucratic warrant of fitness that will add $100 million costs in administration that we passed on to the very tenants that we're trying to help.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister dispute the statement in Children Commissioner Russell Will's submission on the RTA bill that insulation and proper heating, which would be included in a rental's warrant of fitness, would save low-income families $800 a year in health costs alone?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The error in the Children's Commissioner's analysis is that if you impose costs on landlords, for instance, if we required every landlord in the country...
Point of order, sir. He isn't addressing the question at all.
Order.
It was very clear.
Order. Both members resume the seat. Can I ask the member to repeat the question for the benefit of the Minister?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister dispute the statement in Children Commissioner Russell Will's submission that insulation and proper heating, which would be included in a rental's warrant of fitness, would save low-income families $800 a year in health costs alone?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr.
Yes, I do dispute those, because the flaw in the Children's Commissioner's analysis is that if we imposed a requirement on every single landlord in New Zealand to provide, for instance, a new heat pump in every one of those properties, that cost would be passed on in the rents. And what you do need to include is the regulatory costs that are passed on for families, and not simply pretend that somehow, when we impose regulatory requirements, that it is a free good.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Joanne Hayes.
How many people have been killed in house fires in recent years, and what advice has he had about the presence of smoke alarms in these tragedies?
Mr.
The
Speaker.
Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, there has been an estimated 47 deaths from house fires in rental properties over the past 6 years. Half of those had no smoke alarms, and so the government's requirement for those to be installed by the 1st of July this year will save many lives. To ensure we get the maximum safety dividend from this new requirement, we're also requiring that the new smoke alarms be the long life ones, because there has been tragic loss of life where smoke alarms have been present but the batteries have either been taken out or have not been replaced, and there is an extra safety dividend by requiring those long life smoke alarms.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why does the Minister consider his bill will be enough when even once it has passed, rental homes will still be cold, damp and mouldy because they won't be properly heated and they won't be properly ventilated?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the part the member seems to overlook on an issue like ventilation is it's about actually people and the tenant using the property wisely, as well as it being provided with ventilation. So what we have provided for quite sensibly as part of the package of the bill that requires home insulation, that requires smoke alarms, that also enforces the existing law around those standards, a good quality information campaign to remind both landlords of their current responsibilities around quality, but also tenants and the things that they can do to contribute to homes being warmer, drier and safer.
Supplementary question, Joanne Hayes.
Thank you. How much money has this government invested in retrofitted home insulation, and how does that compare with the previous government?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, this government has spent $45 million on insulating every state home that could be, and a further $450 million on the Warm Up New Zealand program of subsidies, coming to a total of $495 million. I'm advised that over the 9 years of the previous government, they spent $31 million. That is, this government has spent 16 times as much money on making our homes warmer, drier and safer.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
What is his response to a submitter today on the RTA bill who described living in a state house for some years that is insulated ceiling and floor but remains consistently mouldy because of poor heating and poor ventilation inside the house, and whose only advice from Housing New Zealand on ongoing complaints is that he should use Genola to wash it off, despite the mould returning because of poor maintenance.
Quite long enough.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
I would say to that member and to that submitter that the current housing regulations require homes to be both in terms of adequate ventilation and for those homes to be free of dampness. And one of the important provisions in that very bill before the Select Committee is to give us greater capacity to enforce the existing regulations rather than creating an expensive bureaucratic warrant of fitness as the member proposes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Isn't the Minister's refusal to implement a proper rental housing warrant of fitness, in light of all the advice he's received that it is necessary for child health and well-being, the worst kind of penny pinching, government penny pinching, the kind that will cost New Zealand children their lives?
Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable Dr Nick
no,
Smith.
quite the opposite. What the cost-benefit analysis has said is that home insulation makes good sense and we're doing it. It says that smoke alarms makes good sense and we're doing it. But what we're not going to do is silly petty provisions like that member's bill that has inspectors going around to see whether we've got glass visibility strips on every one of our windows and fining New Zealand homeowners for provisions that I bet the majority of members of this House don't even have in their own homes.
Order. Question,